When it comes to the parables of Christ, there are certain parables where you can kind of pick and choose to pick a certain aspect of the parable and use that to kind of spin the whole homily. But I find you can't really do that when it comes to certain parables. And top of the list in that regard is the parable of the Prodigal Son from the Gospel of Luke chapter 15. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through the entire parable step by step, because to do otherwise wouldn't really do justice to this particular story. So obviously, as a matter of background, there's this father who is emblematic of God, and he has two sons. One is younger and one is older. And basically, the younger son goes to his father and says, "Give me the share of the property owed unto me." And so basically, I don't care about you, I don't care about our relationship. All I care about is the inheritance which is due unto me when you're basically dead. So basically what I'm saying to you, Dad, is drop dead. I wish you were dead. Just give me the share of the inheritance owed unto me, like right now. And the father gives him the share of the property owed to him, and then the son leaves. Now obviously there's kind of a lot going on here, but in a certain sense I might suggest that the younger son in this moment is expressing an unspoken fantasy which is actually in the hearts of many people living throughout the world throughout the course of history. What if there was no God? What if there was no right or wrong, true or false, good or bad, as a result of which I could do whatever I wanted? I could go the way of self-indulgence, go the way of addiction, do whatever, indulge fully in wealth, pleasure, power, or honor without worrying about the consequences. So again, this is what the younger son in a certain sense is asking for at the outset of the story, and by God he gets it. And then what happens? He finds himself eventually hungry. He finds that his life is dissipated, not because of some arbitrary punishment handed to him by his father, but because of the natural law of spiritual physics, if you will. And so the whole idea is that if you simply go the way of indulgence, again, fully indulging in wealth, pleasure, power, and honor, and you completely divorce yourself from your relationship with Christ, you will find yourself being empty, lost, sad, and confused. Again, not as a punishment, but a natural consequence of the choices that you make. Because whether or not you realize that your heart truly is restless until it rests in the Lord. And it's kind of funny, the famous comedian Jim Carrey says pretty much the same thing. And so just to kind of paraphrase, what he says is, I wish everyone would have the opportunity to fully indulge in the thing which they believe will ultimately give them joy, such that they might realize sooner rather than later that that's not it, that their hearts are made for something more. And friends, that's why the father permits the younger son to indulge in this way, such that he might learn that his heart is restless until it rests in something more, in someone more. In any case, in the midst of his hunger and his deep sense of want and longing, the younger son starts thinking. And so basically what he says is like, gosh, I am hungry, I am starving. But when I think back to my father's hired hands, those people have bread enough to spare. And again, here I am dying of hunger. And so he comes up with a plan. And so basically what he says is like, look, I know what I'll do. I'll go home and I'll basically lie to my father. And my father will buy this deception because basically he's an idiot. And so basically I'll pretend that I'm sorry. I'll pretend that I feel really bad that I told him to basically drop dead. And so what I'll say to him is, Father, I've sinned before heaven and before earth. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. Now, obviously, you can see that the son has a massively skewed notion as to who the father is, right? So, who is my father? My father is an idiot. My father is a moron. And more to the point, my father is an ogre. He is the one whose love must be earned and whose anger must be appeased. And so if I go to him and I say, oh, please, I'm so sorry, he might take pity on me. Again, his anger might be appeased. And then in response, he might show me some measure of mercy and give me something to eat. And so in the aftermath of this internal thought process, the younger son arises, and so begins his return to being in right relationship with God. But you'll notice the reasons why he arises, right? They're less than ideal. And so, for example, he doesn't go back because he feels bad that he insulted his father. He doesn't go back because he's aware of the gravity of his sin. No, he goes back only because he's hungry. And his plan, again, is to trick his father into giving him some food. But you see, what's amazing, and the story conveys this, is that in the eyes of God, that's fine. That's good enough, at least for now. And you see that in the multi-layered response on the part of the father in the parable of the prodigal son. And so first of all, what you hear is that while the younger son is still far off, the father sees him, which implies that he's been watching and waiting for a really long time, watching and waiting for the slightest move of his son back to his father. And then secondly, what you hear is that the father himself runs to his son. Now, as a matter of historical background, rich men at the time of Christ, they didn't go to people, but instead they sent people to fetch other people to come to them. And what's more, rich men, they never ran because it was seen as being beneath them. It was seen as being an affront to their own personal dignity. And yet, again, here's this father who doesn't care about self-respect, who doesn't care about dignity, but only cares about his son, as a result of which he runs to his son. And then, of course, when he gets to his son, what you hear is that he embraces his son. And the reason why is not simply because he's happy to see his son, but also because he wants to protect his son. And so think of it like this. The father was obviously really rich, and therefore a really important guy in the context of the community, right? And so imagine this younger son taking this money out of the local economy. That obviously would have had an undue impact on the other people living in that village or town. And so when word got out that the son was basically coming back home, the people would have lined up. They would have formed a gauntlet, if you will. As a result of which, in order for the son to go back to his father, he would have to run the gauntlet. And so basically he would have to run this path, again, lined by different people who were angry at him, who hated him, who wanted to hurt him. But again, the father knows this, and so he runs and embraces his son because he's happy to see him, certainly, but also because he wants to protect him from the mob. And so through this prophetic gesture of embracing his son, the father is basically saying to the mob, look, you will not hurt my son. And so even though you might be mad at him, even though you might want to hurt him, he remains my son. And so if you want to hurt him, you have to hurt me first. And again, I demonstrate that by embracing my son. Now at this point, the son is obviously oblivious to the sentiments and heart of the father, and all he wants to do is implement his supposedly well thought out but actually devious plan. And so obviously what he says to his father is, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And what you expect is that he's going to say the very next line. Therefore, treat me as one of your hired hands. Treat me as one of your slaves. But you'll notice that the father doesn't allow him to finish. But instead he gives him three things. A ring, the family ring, a robe of the finest quality, and also sandals for his feet. And by giving him these three things, what the father is saying to the son is like, look, I have no interest in you going a way of wallowing in shame or self-hatred. I want you to spend no time going that direction. And so there's going to be no prolonged period where you're forced, for example, to work like a slave before you're restored to full sonship. No, instead, it's right now. Right now, you're fully restored to be my son. Because the whole point is that if you're going to go work in a field, you're not going to be dressed like that. You're not going to have fancy sandals, never mind a fancy robe or the family ring. And so again, you are restored to full and complete sonship. Now, of course, all of this is marked by a party, right? And so the father commands the killing of the fatted calf, and he commands, again, a party to commence, marked by singing and dancing, drinking and feasting, to illustrate the joy which is manifest in his heart. And so basically the takeaway message is, I'm so happy. I am so happy and so filled with joy at the return of my son that I want everyone to celebrate. So full is my happiness, so full is my joy. Now at this point, the elder son arrives at the scene, right? And so what we hear is that he hears the sound of rejoicing, he hears the sound of partying, and he's upset when he hears that the reason for the party is because of the return of his brother. And so he refuses to enter the party. And so the father comes out to him. At which point the elder son complains to his father, Father, I have slaved for you for all these years, and yet you had never given my friends and I even a goat to celebrate with. And yet now, when this son of yours has come back, you kill the fatted calf for him. Now in response, what does the father say? The father says, Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate, because your brother has come back. He was dead, but now he's alive again. He was lost, but now he is found. And with that, the story basically ends. And you see, the reason why the story ends in this way, the reason why the story ends on such a cliffhanger, is because the story is being told for the benefit of the elder son. And the reason why we know this is because of what happens immediately before Jesus tells the story. And so what you hear in the context of the Gospel of Luke chapter 15 is that the scribes and the Pharisees are basically complaining to Jesus' disciples. And so basically what they say to them is, why does this man eat with sinners and spends time with them? And when Jesus hears this, what does he do? He tells this story, the parable of the prodigal son, where the elder son is representative of the scribes and the Pharisees and their particular attitude. So when we go back to the gospel, what can we say about the elder son? Well, one thing which comes to mind right away is this notion that the elder son believes that he is very different than his brother. And so basically he defines his sense of value and self-worth and identity based on his ability to follow rules, as a result of which he looks down on other people who don't follow the rules in the way that he does or who don't practice their faith in the way that he does. Whereas the reality is that the elder son is actually not that much different than the younger son. Because even though the elder son says that all I really wanted was a young goat, what he really wanted, what he truly wanted, was a fatted calf. And so at the end of the day, regardless of which brother we're talking about, both of them are really attached to their stomachs. All they're thinking about is, how can I get that fatted calf? Or how can I get the pot of gold, which I believe will ultimately make me happy? And so given all that, even though the elder son seems to be good and noble and responsible, in reality, he too is being somewhat manipulative. And so basically, if you think about it, the way he's thinking is like, look, the only reason why I'm following these rules is not because I believe in them. It's not because I love God or love neighbor. It's because I'm thinking, well, gosh, if I follow these rules, somehow the Lord will reward me with some variation of a pot of gold or a fatted calf at the end of my life. And quite frankly, isn't it how a lot of us think when it comes to living the Christian life? And so perhaps deep down, in reality, I long to be the younger son. I would love to live without rules. I would love to live without consequences. But unfortunately, there's the Lord my God. And so therefore I have to live with rules. And so I follow this really prescribed rule of life, even though I don't like it, because hopefully, I guess one day if I keep it up, I'll receive my heavenly reward. And quite honestly, I think a lot of people live the Christian life precisely in that space. Whereas in contrast, what you're supposed to realize is that the secret to finding happiness and joy and peace, all these things that you long for, is not going the way of indulgence, but it's also not going the way of simply following rules, but instead it's by going the way of sharing in God's blessed life. And so yeah, if you go the way of indulgence, you won't find joy because that's contrary to the way of love. But at the same time, if you simply follow the rules without any sense of intention or purpose, that's not going to be satisfactory too. You're called to take it one step further, to not simply follow the rules, but to give everything to the Lord, to give Him everything and hold back nothing. And while there are certainly many ways to kind of gauge our own kind of personal progress in this regard, one really important way to do so is to examine how we look at other people when they're making their own struggles to journey back to the Lord. And so the question we have to ask ourselves in a certain sense is that when I look at people who are perhaps light years from becoming the person that the Father is calling them to be, as we all are, do I look at that person with bitterness, with a sense of condemnation, with a sense of undue judgment? Or in contrast, do I look to pursue, never mind actually rejoice and celebrate even the slightest movement of anyone back to the Lord? As a result of which, even though that person's personal journey might be fraught with all sorts of less than ideal motivations or circumstances, I still rejoice. I still rejoice in the fact that this person is coming back to the Father, mindful of the fact that in the words of St. Faustina Kowalska, that great saint of divine mercy, there is no greater glory we can give to God the Father than to have recourse to His mercy. And friends, what does that look like? That looks like the prodigal son returning to his Father in heaven. And may God bless you all.